going right now, so whenever you're ready.
I'm Herb Meyr. I grew up in Los Altos, California. Went to Mountain View High School and then San Jose State, where I got a degree in chemistry and became a second lieutenant. I worked in New York City for Shell Chemical Corporation before going to Webb Air Force Base for T-37 and T-38. In class 63E, we were one of the first in the T-38. From there, a group of us went to Luke Air Force Base to check out in the F-100. We started with the C model first in the 14th Squadron, and then we went to the 17th Squadron for our final checkout in the D model. Some of my classmates were guys like Huey Moreland and Alex McDermott and a whole bunch of other guys that flew the F-100 and even the F-105, like George Vipon and Dwayne Zig went to Okinawa and were in Vietnam in one of the first squadrons. In the 14th Squadron, Derek Hines, RAF officer, was our flight commander, and some of the IPs were Redhead Wilson and Dutch Armstrong and Clyde Sykes, who welcomed us to Luke Air Force Base and reminded us that happy hour was a required event, military event. So I don't think I missed happy hour. From there, I went to Myrtle Beach, and when I arrived, they said, "Where the hell have you been?" I said, "Well, I've been skiing." And they said, "Well, we're leaving in a week for Incirlik, Turkey." And the ops officer, Don Gerard, said, "Well, and you're flying with me tomorrow, and then you got to take a TAC check and an instrument check, and then pack your bags." And I didn't even have a place to live. So anyway, I passed the TAC check, instrument check, and away. Instead of flying the F-100 over, we had to go by C-130 across the Atlantic, and we blew an engine and ended up spending 5 days in Spain and Torrejon. And we finally get to Incirlik. That squadron was all teed off because we were late, and I was on one of the first groups that went on nuclear alert, and Hal McCumber was my flight commander. And so that was the first time I got to look at the map and everything of what the target was and everything. And I was looking at my map and reading the fuel things, and I realized after I dropped the bomb, I was going to have to bail out because I didn't have enough fuel. And we had to do the over the shoulder at that time for the delivery. Well, a few days after being on nuclear alert, all of a sudden a war started out with the Turkish Air Force and Cyprus, I believe. And all of a sudden we had the whole place was just F-100s parked everywhere, Turkish Air Force. Well, somebody got nervous and they said, "Hey, you guys are sitting there with F-100s with nuclear bombs, 4 of them, and now we've got a war going on and we're in the middle of it." So they had this great idea: "We want you to evacuate the nuclear alert pad in the middle of the night, like 2 o'clock in the morning." I said, "Well, where the hell are we going?" And they said, "Well, we're going to send you to Libya." I said, "Oh, okay." And we have a tanker set up and everything. So I called up to the BOQ and got some of my valuables to send down that I could stuff in the F-100. And they disconnected the power source to the nuclear bomb so we wouldn't drop it on the way over the Mediterranean. And we had our G-suits on, we had maps laying there on the table, and 2 o'clock in the morning, somebody finally came up with the right decision, said, "Well, we're going to cancel it." So they canceled it, and we went to bed and spent our tour the 1 week on the pad. Then after 3 months at Incirlik, we were supposed to go back to Myrtle Beach, but another squadron that was supposed to go to Aviano, I think, got involved to go to Southeast Asia for the first part of the Vietnam War. And so we went from Turkey to Aviano, and big difference. I loved Aviano. I mean, that was you know. So 3 months there, and I get back to Myrtle Beach, and then I got volunteered to go to jump school because a general in the Air Force, I think it was Sweeney, who also came up with, we also had to wear fatigues. Sweeney greens is what they called it. So I ended up in August of 64 going through jump school, which I'll tell you, in the middle of the summer, it was a pretty difficult course. But the requirement was we had to have 5 jump qualified fighter pilots in each TAC squadron. And so that was kind of the big push. And the squadron commander was a lot of heat because nobody wanted to volunteer for it. So, but he said, I'll make it up to you and you'll get more flying time than anybody else. So I ended up going. Well, I flew the rest of 64, even went to a gunnery meet out at Luke, representing Myrtle Beach. And for some reason we didn't win, but anyway, in the first part of January 65, I got a call from the DO, and he says, you want to go to Aviano? And I said, yeah, I'll go to Aviano. And he says, well, we had one of the pilots crash turning base leg over at Aviano, and they need a replacement. And so I ended up joining the 352nd Squadron, the Bumblebees, and Zeitner was my flight commander. And you had to be a skier to be in his flight. And he had it set up so you do 2 nuclear alert tours back to back, so we had enough time to take leave or time off to go up into the Italian Alps and go skiing. Old Chuck Zeitner, great guy, and he's at the F-86 reunion, the last one, and he'll be at the F-100 reunion. But anyway, I flew with the 352nd, and at that time I had ordered a new Porsche from Germany, and it was going to be the last of the 356 models, if you know Porsches. And I got there with a group. We actually went to we were skiing at the Zugspitze, and I took a train to Stuttgart. And I got there and they said, well, your car isn't ready, something wrong with the paint. And so they said, we'll give you a ticket back and give you a call when it's ready. And then they said, have you seen the new 911s? And I said, no. And so I went over to a garage and they had about 10 of them, all different colors and everything. And I said, wow, these look pretty nice. And sat in it, and I said, can I trade in my order on one of these? And they said, we don't know. And I went back and sat in the waiting room, and one of the big Porsche guys came down and said, we got you a car. And I went in and they said, you take this one? I said, fine. And so they changed out the speedometer and stuff, and I got a test drive with one of the guys at the factory, and I said, wow, what did I buy? This thing really goes. And it turned out I had the first 911 in Italy, and so I brought it back to Aviano. In fact, it spent the first night back at the Zugspitze and skied another day, and then one of the other guys in the squadron went back with it. And so I got it back to Italy, and it was in car shows, and the local dealer did the whole thing. So Aviano was great. And then the 355th Squadron showed up. And so I stayed there with them. In fact, I got to fly a local area flight in the backseat of an F with the squadron commander, who was Hiawatha Mohawk. Blue-blooded Indian, quite a character. He always flew or came out to the airplane in his big hat, you know, with the lightning bolts on it and everything. But then they left, and then my squadron, the 356, the Green Demons, showed up, and I was flying with them and having a great time. I had an Italian girlfriend whose family owned a winery and was just really loving it. And then they realized, my God, you're coming up on 6 months. You got to leave and get back to the States, otherwise you become PCS. And that wouldn't have bothered me. But anyway, while we were sitting alert in June of 65, my flight commander said, we got a call from Myrtle Beach. We need volunteers for A-1 Sky Raiders in the Vietnamese Air Force. And I didn't even know what an A1 was. And he said, we got to do it or we're going to miss the war. Okay, this was June of '65, you got to realize. So I got back to Myrtle Beach, and my squadron was still at Aviano, but Myrtle Beach ended up, they were redoing the runway, so we went to MacDill for, I don't know, a couple months or something. And then I got orders to go to the A1, checked out at Hurlburt, a real quickie checkout. And here I was, an all-jet guy, and I'll tell you, the checkout in the Skyraider was the hardest of all the airplanes. Just amazing, 2,800 horsepower, and now you got 18 cylinders and a big prop on the front and a lot of torque. And I ended up going to Bemois, November '65, and then joining the 520th Vietnamese Fighter Squadron. And there was only one other advisor that was there at the time, and myself. And in January '66, we moved to a brand new base that they built on the Mekong River, just north of Can Tho, called Ben Tui. And it was right on the river and stuff. And so we ended up moving down there, PCS, I guess you call it, in January. Before that, we would go down and sit just ground alert just during the daytime. But anyway, in about March of '65, the senior guy who was Major Richardson, who was actually the son of General Richardson, who ran the air war during World War II, when they came back into Europe from England and stuff. He was on a mission and flying, and he was heading back to the air base at Ben Tui, and he had a fire in the wing. I don't know if the 20 millimeter gun had blown up, because it was kind of an old 20 millimeter, and it had a problem that sometimes it would pack another shell on top of another shell and blow up, or he took a hit. Well, he tried to get back to the base, and it burnt through the controls. He rolled over and went right into the Mekong River, and never had a chance. We didn't have ejection seats at that time. And so finally, a couple days later, some Navy dive teams showed up, and they went in the Mekong River, and they went down and cut him out of the cockpit. But the worst thing, they brought his body back to Ben Tui, and me being the only other guy, I went out to the chopper, and they said, well, you got to identify the body, you know. And it's still, I could see this picture in my mind. It never gets out. And then I had to sign the document, and you know, it was kind of so here I was kind of by myself in the Vietnamese squadron, and I was just a first lieutenant, but and I think we were assigned to actually a special operations squadron out of the Pentagon, and but later on I went up to Saigon and to the morgue there to gather his personal effects and ship them back. But that was another experience. You never want to visit a morgue. I mean, they had people stacked up in one of those rooms. You know, and that was just the start of the Vietnam War. But anyway, I flew the A1. We finally got some replacement pilots over. A captain showed up, and so I flew the A1 all the way through November of '66 down there. The one crazy thing I did, we were basically, I had my own personal call sign in Vietnam. I was Panther 08. I could take a A1, never contacted anybody, fly anywhere I wanted to go in Vietnam, you know, do cross countries in the middle of the war. And on Sunday we used to go to Vung Tau and go to the beach, and we'd take one of these two-seater A1s, and the most people I had in an A1 was 14. I had all Vietnamese pilots and in the back and girlfriends and stuff, and off we would go to the beach. And also being down in the Delta, and there was no roads coming down for resupply and stuff, so every so often I'd fly up to a place in the mountains called The Lot, and it was just a little airstrip. And this was a city that was up real high altitude, really beautiful, trees and everything. There was a university there, and I'd land there and I'd pick up fresh vegetables. And one time I picked up, I think, 6 pigs that they had hog-tied and loaded them over the Blue Room in the A1. And we were going to have a big barbecue down at Bentui. And it was kind of amazing with them squealing back there and everything. And another time I went up and there was some type of a riot going on between the students and stuff, and there were some buildings burning. And they said, well, you got to go up there. Our maintenance officer, he's up there with his girlfriend, and you got to pick him up. So I came in, and the weather was real bad. And I came in over the town and finally saw the runway, and I took my 38 out and I had it sitting on my lap, and I taxied or turned around on the runway. Here he came running out of the bushes with his Vietnamese girlfriend. They jumped in the back, and I brought him back down to Bentui. And then another crazy thing, it was the 4th of July, and the guys up that were advisors at the squadron, at the Da Nang, Vietnamese squadron, said, hey, come on up, we're going to have a party. So I took an A1H Skyraider, flew up to Da Nang, and when I landed, these guys were out in the ramp, and they were getting ready to go on a mission. I said, well, where the hell are you going? They said, well, we're going to North Vietnam. We're going to be bombing some roads going into Laos. And I said, well, hell, can I go along? And they said, yeah. So I said, what do you want? I said, well, it's five, I think I took 8 500-pound bombs or something. The A1 was really amazing. At that time, I'd watched the F-100s circle around while they were dropping, and at that time, I think they were only carrying like 2 bombs or 2 napes or what. So I ended up going at number 4, following these Vietnamese. I never was even in the briefing, and watched these guys where they were dropping bombs, and I rolled in and dropped some bombs on some little bridges and the road. And then we came back to Da Nang, and they said, well, we got a party going out on a British ship in the harbor. And so we went out there, that American flag and the Union Jack, and a lot of drinking, and somebody had a water ski boat. We ended up skiing out there in that bay, which I found out later was loaded with sharks. But then we came back to Da Nang, went to the Officers Club for a 4th of July party, and then the next morning I flew back down to Bentui. And that was kind of an exciting flight, because I'm kind of buzzing down, I think cutting around Saigon through D-zone, and all of a sudden, off to one side of me, everything is blowing up. And it turned out there was B-52 up there, and he was dropping that big string of bombs, and I almost flew underneath the damn thing, because I was just flying VFR and heading down there. But anyway, got down to Bentui, and like I said, I finished my mission down there, except for one real exciting mission. The Vietnamese ops officer came to me and he says, can we drop flares, or do we have any? And so I checked with the maintenance guy, the advisor, and he said, yeah, we got flares and stuff. And one of the sergeants said, well, you know, in the back of that 2-seater, there's a trap door. And he says, why don't we take those flares, we'll put them in the back of in the Blue Room, and then I'll sit back there and we'll get a radio cord from you to the back for the command to drop, and I'll just hold on to the ring and stuff them through the trap door. I said, well, I guess it'll work. I was a little worried, you know, if we take a hit, you know, and the flares blow up, I can jump out, but you're going to be in trouble in the back. But so about midnight was the takeoff time, and they had some type of intelligence. I don't know why the U.S. Air Force wasn't down there, but right where the Mekong River comes into the Delta, they had some intelligence that a Chinese ship was in there, and he was unloading arms, and a pretty good sized ship, and they had sampans ferrying the stuff to the beach. And so I came down there, we had 3 A1Hs with bombs and napalm, and of course 20 millimeter. And so there was a little bit of moonlight, and so I flew over the beach at, I don't know, 3,000 or 4,000 feet, and hollered to the guy in the back, start jumping flares. And we caught all these people and all the junk being loaded, all the arms on the beach. And here comes the A1Hs in, 3, and dropping bombs and napalm and stuff. And all of a sudden, these guys had some big guns too, because here came some red balls coming up. They were shooting and stuff. And so when the flares would go out, I'd make another pass back and start shooting. And they were strafing the area too. And so after one pass of the flares, I asked the guy in the back, the sergeant, I said, well, do you mind if I do some strafing? Because I had 4 guns also. So I went out and strafing some of the sampans that were heading out to the ship. And one of the guys made a pass on the ship, and but we were out of ammo and everything. Well, we finally get back to Bentui, and we had, right at just before sunrise, we sent 3 more A1Hs of Vietnamese down there. And one of our young lieutenants rolled in on that Chinese ship with a 500-pound bomb and put it like right down the smokestack. And I've got pictures of it. It was in the paper. It blew it right in half, and it was sunk there on the sandbar on the Mekong River. But we never told anybody about it because this thing wasn't fragged or anything. And then we started thinking about, okay, that wasn't too safe what we did with the flares in the back. And I think they finally got it, so they loaded it on the pylons. But that was kind of an exciting thing. And then another time, they built these little forts that they decided to bring the local people and put them in, which was a crazy idea because they always got surrounded and were being mortared and everything, and people trying to come over the fence. And we got a call to come on down. It's actually in the middle of the day that we were under, some Army guy was screaming on the radio he was under attack, and we circled over and we couldn't see anything, you know. So I said, well, I'll make a pass down in the direction he thinks it's coming from. And I flew down and I could see where they had dug trenches. They covered it up with straw. So you could hardly see it. Well, I took a hit in the tail of the airplane and it said, I know where they are. And we climbed up, and I had napalm, like 8 cans, and just put it right down over the straw, and we dropped some bombs on it and everything. But that was quite a mission, and the guy was, he was just going crazy on the radio that we saved his life and everything, because they were right at the last barrier before coming in. And then one evening, it must have been after midnight, we had a little officers club that was just more than just a little shack to drink beer in, and we had no air conditioning in Bentui, if you could believe, a year in Vietnam with no air conditioning. But I had just fallen asleep and a huge explosion went off. I thought the building was gone, you know, and we were being mortared, and rockets were coming in from the Mekong River area. And so I jumped up, put my flight suit on. I always had my helmet, carried it back to the shack where we lived. And I jumped in a Jeep and I went running out toward the runway. And I started looking around, you know, there was tracers, there was things blowing up. And it was just like I was in a movie. I had this feeling like it was World War II or something. And I drive out to the ramp, and everybody else had run and jumped in the bunkers, even the crew chiefs. And so I pulled out the chalks. I saw an A1, it was loaded with bombs, and jumped in it, started it up, and didn't turn the lights on, taxied out, and tried to call the tower, and nobody would answer, and got airborne the opposite direction from the Mekong River. And finally a guy on the radio came up and said, was that you? Just took off. I said, yeah. Okay. I said, where are most of the shots coming from? The mortars and the flashes? And he gave me a heading, because the tower guys had bailed out also, because there was a helicopter burning right there at the base of the tower, which kind of lit everything up when I wanted to pick out my airplane to fly. So I headed on over there, and then they stopped firing. And I couldn't drop any bombs because there was friendly villages. And what the Viet Cong would do is come down, put their guns on the women and children and stuff, and then fire their mortars out there. And then we would get trapped into, you know, trying to trap us into dropping bombs, and you're killing the people right outside the front gate type of thing. So I circled the base the rest of the night, and I'd had 3 or 4 beers just before taking off. I hadn't planned on flying, and came in and landed just as the sun was coming up, because you could fly for a long time in the A1. And then we said, well, you know, this is BS. We're down here, and we have nobody down here to protect us. We've got maybe the Vietnamese army and stuff. So we scheduled a guy to take off at midnight every night and circle the base. You know, finally they sent down a C-47 with the guns to spook the Magic Dragon, and so he flew around the base at night, and it wasn't attacked at least for a few years. Maybe it was during Tet, I don't know. But anyway, one night when I was circling the base, it was a clear night, there wasn't anybody on the radio, nothing's going on. All of a sudden a guy comes up screaming on the radio that he was under attack, and so I answered, you know, where are you? And he was at some army, one of these fort things again, and it was like 2 o'clock in the morning, and you know, I said, well, I kind of made the decision I'll head down there, but I was worried if I leave, the base would maybe get under attack. So I got down there, circled the thing, and I said, well, where's it coming from? And he said, well, I got heading and stuff, and it's, you know, so many yards out, 300 or 400 yards out from the thing. And I said, well, is there any friendlies to villages, you know, because this was at night? And he said, no. So I selected one 500-pound bomb and put it right down, you know, in that area, and circled some more. I stayed down there with him for about an hour, and then I headed back to Ben Thuy. But I never told anybody, and the Vietnamese didn't say anything about missing one bomb on the airplane. Probably would have got court-martialed or something. If I was in the Air Force, I definitely would. I left there, and I was going back to F-100s, because that was the promise, if you believe assignments. And they said, whoops, we don't have enough A1 instructors. And the Navy was giving all their A1s to the Air Force. And all of a sudden, I was an expert in the A1. And I lost my assignment to the 79th Squadron in Woodbridge in England. So I ended up going to Hurlburt Field, and I trained Americans and Vietnamese in the A1. And I also got checked out in the T-33, which I had never flown, but I didn't tell anybody because they assumed that everybody had flown the T-33, but I was the 38 guy. But I really enjoyed that. That was like going back to the first of jet aviation. And so I flew that also as a simulated MiG, aggressor pilot, to train the A1s that were going to North Vietnam as Sandys to rescue the pilots that were shot down, 105 guys at 4. And they had lost 2 A1s that were shot down, and so that's why we got this program going. There was about 3 or 4 of us that flew the T-33 also. And so we developed the tactics of, okay, coming in with the T-33 and how to avoid a jet, and if you had any altitude, the roll underneath was perfect. And if you would do it right, you could actually get an overshoot with that jet and turn back, and you could actually get a pretty good shot on the jet as it was passing you. And in fact, the Navy shot down 2 MiGs with A1 Sky Raiders and stuff, which was quite a story. But I flew down there at Hurlburt, and I really loved it. I had a beach house out on Okaloosa Island, just down from the bar called the Dirty Bird, and there was the Officers Beach Club that was going every Friday night, and it was really a great place. I had a boat that was parked in the backyard and water skied year-round and went out fishing in the Gulf. And then I wanted to go to the A-10, but there wasn't enough of them yet, and this was 1969. They were just getting it going. And all of a sudden, a bunch of us, especially all of us that were jet qualified in the T-Bird, we got assignments to F-111s. So here I was at Nellis in the fall of '69, And a whole bunch of F-100 guys showed up checking out in the F-111A model. In fact, one of my instructors was a guy named Anthony, Captain Anthony. And tragically, he got killed after I had left to go to Cannon, PCS. He was flying with a student, and the wing failed, and he ended up losing his life out here on the range. And that, I got to Cannon in December of '69, and I flew one flight in the F-111, and then the wing failed here at Nellis, and so the 111s got grounded for probably 6 months or more. So they said, well, you'd flown the F-100, we got F-100s here, so I ended up going down, I think with the 481st, and checking out in the F-100 again. And so I flew the F-100 for 6 months at Cannon, and then I got a call, said, you want to go to Hayford? And I didn't even know where that was. They said, Upper Hayford, England. And I said, yeah, that sounds good. Anything to get out of Cannon Air Force Base, Clovis, New Mexico. Maybe it's great flying, but not a great time. And I was still a bachelor, and that's not a bachelor town. So anyway, I get over to Upper Hayford in the fall, and I was assigned to the 79th Squadron, the same one that I was supposed to go to back in '65, and they were just getting rid of their F-100s. And I came in, and I had more time in the last year in the 100 than they did. And they wouldn't let me fly it. They said, oh, you're going to the 111. And I was already qualified in the 111, but so I didn't get to fly the F-100 out of Hayford. And then they said, well, you haven't flown the 111 for such a long time. You got to go back to Nellis. So I ended up going back TDY for a couple months to check out again and get current in 111. I came back, and we were the first group to sit nuclear alert then with the F-111 in Europe. We actually carried 2 B-61s at that time, and we had enough fuel to go somewhere else after we would drop the bombs. And the nice thing, being in Europe, you could fly low level, hands off with TFR, just control the throttle, and you could cruise in at 540 knots. And there was a good chance you were going to make it. You were like a human cruise missile. That's the way I, where the F-100 was like a nuclear kamikaze pilot, you know. And it also had a windscreen you could pull up and put this aluminum over the front, so if there was nuclear explosions going on, you wouldn't get blinded. In the F-100, when I got my packet there at Incirlik, I looked at it and I had an eye patch that was in the bag. And I said, what's this for? They said, well, you put this on when you're going in on one eye. And if a nuclear explosion goes off and you're blinded, then you move the patch over to the other eye. And I said, have you ever tried flying low level just with one eye? I said, don't we lose depth perception? Well, nobody, we aren't going to talk about that. But so anyway, I spent 3 years at Upper Hayford, and then they said I got assigned to Takli, Thailand from Hayford. So, and but they said, well, you got to go back to Nellis again because they want you to do some heavyweight drops and that kind of stuff for a month and stuff. And my girlfriend was going to go back to the States with me, and I found out that I could go back up to the States on the QE2, the big cruise ship, and bring my car with me. And I still had my Porsche 911, so I put it on the QE2, and it was downstairs, and we cruised 4 days to New York. We got to New York, there was my car sitting on the dock along with my baggage, jumped in the Porsche and roared off to Nellis, and flew some heavy weights and that kind of stuff. And then they said, well, you can't go directly to Takli, you got to go through what we call jungle survival school or snake school. So I had to spend a week in the Philippines at Clark and go through that, and then I spent a year at Takli right at the end of the war. But we were sitting kind of semi-alert, like, okay, if they come across the border, we're going to do something. So we ended up flying around Thailand quite a bit. And I ended up assistant ops officer and also was a stand-eval flight examiner. And then I got assignment back to the States, and it was the Cannon Air Force Base. And I went, oh man. So I went in and saw Colonel Crabb, who was he was an F-100 pilot before, and he was the vice commander. And I said, I need some help. I want to go to Nellis. I don't want to go to Canton. And so he called up, he got my orders changed, and I went to Nellis. And I got to Nellis, and I signed in, and I was in the 474th, and in the 428 Squadron. And then they were just starting the fighter weapons school for the 111, and they looked at my time and experience, and they wanted me to go, well, switch and go to the 57th Squadron, or fighter weapons wing. And the 474 said, no, he signed into our wing and we ain't going to release him. So I lost out by just, if I had been a week later, I would end up in fighter weapons school as the outsourced. But anyway, we flew 3 years down here at Nellis, and in, what was it, 76, they started Red Flag. And so I got to fly Red Flag 1, and I got to fly, I don't know how many, because they always wanted 111s in there for targets, basically, to come on in. But then they found out how fast we could fly on the deck. And we would come in and do a bomb delivery, toss, put it in full afterburner, and sometimes the aggressors were F-15s or whatever, and sweep the wings back, and I'd end up being indicating 750 on the deck. And I'd see an F-15 kind of starting to roll in, kind of turn toward them, and I'm going at 200 feet at 1.2 Mach, and there's no chance. They just would pull off because, and you would go fast enough that you would take the paint off the leading edge of that darn, you know, the crew chief always had a can of paint out there to spray the camo when you got back. And so they really learned what a F-111 could do. But then one day we're sitting around at the Red Flag brief, and there's F-16 pilots, and they came up with this crazy idea. I don't know if it was at the bar or what. They said, we want to go in on the deck on your wing, 2 F-16s just sitting there real close, and we want to come sneaking in where the aggressor squadron's going to be up there looking for us. We're coming in, we're going to come in on your wing and then put it in burner and go on up. But then they said, we can't fly at 540 or even 480. I said, what are you going to fly at? Well, 450. Otherwise, we won't have enough fuel to go in, do red flag, and make it back. And so we go in, I'm looking out on each wing, and they're tucked right in, and it worked. I mean, the aggressor squadron was up there, and they're looking around for these F-16s, and they're sucked right in like we were one airplane. And they punched up, and then I accelerated into the target and stuff. So that was kind of a crazy red flag. And then another time, a Canadian, we had dropped bombs that were coming out right on the deck. All of a sudden, here comes an F-4 right over the ridge, just over to one side of me. He comes up over the ridge, rolls and vert, comes back on down, and goes right by me. And we had a kind of a rule. We had an exit route and where you're supposed to come in. So when I got back to Nellis, you know, I looked this guy up and I said, what the hell were you doing? You were a little bit off course there. And he said, yeah, kind of scared me when I saw you, but it was too late. So then they decided to move the F-111s at Mountain Home to Legacy, the F models, and so the 474th wing got moved to Mountain Home, the 3 squadrons of 111s here. And so we moved to Mountain Home, and the Mountain Home wing started the F model at Legacy, replacing the F-4s. And so I ended up the ops officer of one of the squadrons, and 391st, I believe, and I was chief of stand of Al. And then finally somebody looked at my records and said, you've never had a staff job. And I said, well, I never wanted one. So they were gonna, send me to Washington, D.C. And I said, wait a minute. I've been in Idaho. I've got a whole bunch of hunting dogs and boats. I'm a fly fisherman, a skier, and a hunter. And I think I'm going to retire. So I retired after 23 years up there, and have enjoyed it. I'm still in Mountain Home, Idaho, and but I've done a lot of things for nonprofit groups, mostly involved with fishing or hunting. I've been the chairman of the Hendry's Fork Foundation over by Yellowstone. I'm presently on the board of the Oahe Initiative, which was Senator Crapo's proposal that got signed in law, protecting the rivers down there, the Oahe River and some of the wilderness areas. I'm also on the board of the Wild Sheep Foundation for Idaho. I've been the president, and I'm still on the board for the last 20 years. And I'm on the Sage Grouse Working Group, also for Hawaii County, and many other things, fly fishing groups and whatever. So I've stayed quite involved with the public and the politicians, and done a lot of testifying at the Capitol, and it becomes very important. But one of the things they recognize when you come in there, you know, you got to dress up and look good. Put a tie on, whatever. Don't come in looking like some crazy environmentalist. And basically, when you introduce yourself, say, hey, I'm a retired Air Force fighter pilot from Mountain Home. And the reason I retired here is because this is a great state, and you know, I really love it, the hunting and fishing and everything. And I'm normally testifying for resource things. It makes such a big difference after the testimony is over. I mean, the senators or representatives come over, shake your hand, talk to you. But if you just arrive there, like some of the people, you know, they're not even listening to the testimony. So it's really paid off, and Idaho is very proud of their military. We have a guard unit of A-10s at Gowan Field at Boise, and of course we have Mountain Home Air Force Base, which at one time was a composite wing that had the B-1s and F-15s and F-16s all at the same time. And I think that was Tony McPete's idea when he was Chief of Staff of the Air Force. Another F-100 pilot and Thunderbird. In fact, I met Tony McPete down at Eglin when the Thunderbirds were down there. We had a party out at my beach house and another one, and the Thunderbirds were there, the whole thing. But I put in for the Thunderbirds, I see if I could volunteer, and I ended up getting picked in the small group and got to travel with the Thunderbirds to 3 different locations and go to the parties and everything associated. And one thing I realized, I don't know how these guys do it after going through the parties and then flying the next day, but they did it. And there was Tony McPete was on there. A good friend of mine had been on there, was Buster McGee, and he ended up coming through the squadron at Hurlburt, and I was his instructor on a couple of the flights, and he was at Myrtle Beach when I was there. In fact, the DO took Buster up for a training flight on the wing, you know, and I got invited to go to the left wing, and Buster was on that kind of got me going. We were doing loops and rolls and stuff, but I didn't make it. Tragically, the guy that gets selected, another guy from Myrtle Beach, got killed out here on Thunderbird Lake with Mike Miller, who was another good friend that was an A1 advisor I met at Benoit, but they were doing opposing roles and hit, but kind of a tragedy. So anyway, I've enjoyed the flying. I could have kept doing it till I was 60 years old, I think, but you know, I'm really impressed with Super Sabre Society to have 1,400 people. I think we are the biggest of the jet fighter groups that have the reunions and everything separate, and it's really kind of great. I enjoy it each time, even if I haven't been in the squadron and never met the guy. I just love to hear the stories, and okay, you were at this base, you were in Tokyo or in Japan, and it's fantastic. And the website has all the people that have ejected, or most, from the F-111 or F-100 and have told their stories, which is kind of amazing. Let's see. I didn't get to tell the story, I don't think, about the my flight at Myrtle Beach.
Let me look at the time really quick here. They're supposed to get in here at 1. Are you guys?
No, we're observers.
Oh, okay. Well, go ahead. I can cut
Well,
this.
I don't think I got to
Yeah, go ahead and
tell
do
the
it.
story. Well, the story of Myrtle Beach, I was flying on the wing in 1964 summer, and I was chasing another pilot, and we were flying at a low level, about 500 feet, and I started falling behind, and I pushed the throttle up, and nothing happened. And I looked at the gauge, and it was just sitting at 85%. And so I climbed up to about 2,000, 3,000 feet, called ahead and said, hey, I got an emergency. We were approaching Shaw Air Force Base and declared emergency, wanted to land. They called back and said the runway's closed. We've got an airplane with blown tires in the middle. I think it was an F-101 or something. And all the fire trucks I could see down there when we crossed. So they said, okay, we're going to go back to Myrtle Beach, and got a hold of the command post. I was trying to figure out what was wrong. Everybody had some ideas. One guy said, well, try emergency fuel. I tried that. As soon as I did, somebody else screamed, don't do it. I said, too late, and switched it back. So I got back to Myrtle Beach. It was 1,000 overcast, and maybe tops at 2, and I was coming in above it. But here I had an airplane that I only had 85%, you know, and so the idea was take a precision approach, get lined up on the runway. And I told them, when I get 2 miles out, tell me. And then I put the gear down and the flaps down and just pushed it over. And I came out of the clouds and I was pointed like at the overrun. But you know, I had a little bit more speed than normal. Well, I pulled back the throttle just because, you know, I'm going fast, and I just pulled it back. When I pulled it back, all of a sudden all the warning lights came on. The engine quit, wound all the way down. But I had all this speed, and I didn't have time to even call on the radio, and I landed right past Mobile, and popped the chute, cruised on down to the end of the runway, but then I kind of ran out of steam there, and I turned off, but I still had my ass end sticking out on the runway a little bit, and the chute was laying back. And the wing commander drove up next to me, and he said, Lieutenant, why the hell did you leave the airplane here? I said, well, sir, the engine quit. So he said, well, we got to get a tow. And so I got towed in. But that was kind of one of the exciting things. But what I found out about 4 years ago, I was reading the F-100's ejection stories. And I got down to a section of Dumpy Warwick. And I read, he was a student at Luke, and he came off the Gila Bend Ranges after a pass, weapons delivery, and the engine quit. And he tried to make a forced landing in the Gila Bend, and he couldn't make it. And he ended up punching out. So I read the whole story, and I got down to the last paragraph of the accident investigation. And it turned out that the connection to the fuel control had separated for some reason, and the engine quit. The solution to the thing, or corrective action, was to put some type of a spring thing that would stop it at 85% or so. And I went, wow, old Dumpy Warwick saved my ass from jumping out because of his crash and the corrective action. That's what happened to me. The throttle had disconnected from the fuel control and was just being held by this corrective action. So it's kind of amazing, you know. And what really kind of teed me off, I never even got an award or anything from that. All I got was a chewing out for not getting my ass off the runway and leaving the chute out there. But that's my story, and I've enjoyed telling you. Thank you.
Thank you.